that international law, going back to the idea of sovereignty, protects head of state immunity. Now, what is the connection between head of state immunity and sovereignty in international law? Sorry?
Prosecution in international courts.
Okay, so I'd like the whole sentence, please, Cal.
Well, the difference between that thing, the first thing you said, the second thing you said was prosecution in international courts.
What do you mean by that?
Trying to catch up.
Okay.
Is that heads of state can only be prosecuted for crimes which they act, or for acts which they act within their, like, as being the head of
Official
state?
capacity,
The
yeah.
official capacity as head of state.
Why not? Why are they protected from the law?
So they act to the state.
What's it got to do with sovereignty?
Well, states are sovereign, and
Yeah.
they can do what they want in international law. But then, unless it's legal, so I don't know how that relates to sovereignty.
Yeah. So the idea in international law is the theoretical idea, and of course we know that in practice that is not always what happens. But the idea is that all states are equal, and that states would engage on an international level with one another on issues which concern all states or a particular region. The only way of actually being able to do that is if individuals are able to travel from one country to the other, and if they're able to meet at summits, the G8 summit, the African Union summit, and so on, to decide on issues relating to international law and international relations. So there's always been a practice that those individuals will have to be able to travel freely. Now, if they've got an arrest warrant on their heads in one state, then that would prevent them from travelling freely, because then they would have to stay at home. So the idea in international law is diplomatic relations can only happen if those important people can travel freely. International criminal law says, however, that if those individuals have committed international crimes, they need to be prosecuted regardless of their position within that state, regardless of whether they are the Prime Minister, the President, whatever of that state. If they've committed international crimes, they need to be made accountable for that, right? So we've got a clash there of two systems of international law, one saying immunity, the other saying no immunity, yeah? And where has that, in which real life example has that come to a head, this clash?
The Al-Bashir situation.
The Al-Bashir situation, absolutely. So the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, which was on the recommendation of the Security Council. Al-Bashir, however, travelled to an African Union summit in South Africa, and South Africa, the host state, said, this is more important. We're talking about really important regional issues here. We're not going to arrest Al-Bashir, although South Africa is the state party to the Rome Statute. So that clash of the two systems became very apparent in that regard. Now, South Africa was invited to the ICC in a case regarding its non-compliance with the Rome Statute, because the Rome Statute says any member state which fails to comply with the Rome Statute will have to be made responsible. That's again a public international law rather than an international criminal law issue, right? So the public international law issue is being overlaid onto the international criminal law issue. Does that make sense? So you can see this real clash. In public international law with my undergraduates, we talk about fragmentation when we talk about these clashes between different systems of international law, where different systems of international law have become so specialised with their own courts and their own principles and so on, that certain clashes can appear. Now in 2004, Darpo Akande was writing about this problem being a potential problem which has now become a real problem. And for us it's quite interesting because, as I said, it's almost like he goes through our build-up to within the module. So he starts by saying international criminal law is a discipline which mixes domestic criminal law with international law and human rights law. So international criminal law is where all of these different disciplines, transitional justice, elements from these different disciplines come together in international criminal law. At that time, it was not yet really clear that international criminal law would be so influential. This is a really recent thing, right? So this is all at that time still quite hypothetical. So he's saying there are tensions there between the different disciplines. Which one takes precedence? Is it the International Court of Justice, which says immunity, or is it the International Criminal Court, which says no immunity? So you've not only got these two clashing systems, you've also got two very influential courts who decide completely contradictory things. Then there's this question, that was week 1 when we looked at that. Then there's the question, where are international crimes prosecuted? In domestic courts? International crime, so which international crimes are prosecuted in domestic courts? Can we think of, so we've of course been speaking about international courts, but what about domestic courts looking at international crimes?
Humanity, against the humanity.
Sorry?
Against the humanity.
Crimes against humanity? Did you say that?
Against the human being.
Against a human being, yes, but what, so usually in a domestic setting, if you are prosecuted for a crime, it would be something that is in the domestic criminal code. But what about international crimes?
Is that not the whole point of universal jurisdiction, in the sense that domestic courts can prosecute anyone provided they commit an international crime?
That is the whole, yes, that's the whole idea behind universal jurisdiction. Now, the problem is that the tension there is that only some states subscribe to universal jurisdiction. Not all states. So, Switzerland, Spain, Germany, they're states which have in their criminal codes a provision which says that they also prosecute on the basis of universal jurisdiction. And what's universal jurisdiction?
You say someone commits a crime that offends the whole international community, then they can be tried anywhere.
Anywhere, regardless of whether they are the national of that state or whether the crime was committed there. Yeah? Because usually, of course, on the basis of sovereignty, only those courts can prosecute individuals within their jurisdiction, within their sovereign jurisdiction. So Germany, for example, has arrest warrants out for George W. Bush, for maybe for Blair, I'm not sure. So a lot of these former heads of state actually have arrest warrants on their heads by these states who say crimes have been committed and so they can be prosecuted in this state, in these courts. It's a very controversial principle, of course. The Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court, that's different to universal jurisdiction. Why?
sign up.
Yes, absolutely. So because you sign up, you're only within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court if you're a member state. Yeah? You sign up to it. You cede some of your sovereignty. You say, okay, if someone commits an international crime, then, and we are unwilling and unable, this is where complementarity comes in, then this international court will deal with this issue. Yeah? So it's not, the ICC does not deal with universal jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction is usually domestic courts which have issued arrest warrants against individuals who are neither nationals of that state, nor have they committed the crime on the territory of that state. Yeah? So sometimes domestic courts also deal with international crimes. In order to comply with complementarity, now we have the situation in Uganda and in Libya, where they have set up, and also in Mali, where they have come under the jurisdiction of the Rome Statute, but the Rome Statute says only if the state is unwilling or unable. So these states have now said, okay, we can set up a subdivision of our courts which deals specifically with international crimes, and that will meet the complementarity requirements so that our nationals who have committed crimes here or elsewhere but who are really under the jurisdiction of the Rome Statute will still be tried in their own country. So Libya, for example, when it came to Gaddafi, said, no, we have now international crimes as part of our criminal code, so we can try them here. And they did. And then lots of other stuff happened. Anyway, Uganda, which has had this mixed relationship with the International Criminal Court, referring its own case to the International Criminal Court, so willingly giving over jurisdiction to it, then later on saying, actually, we're not that comfortable with it after all, they set up a special war crimes division as part of their High Court in order to comply with the complementarity provisions of the Rome Statute and take back sovereignty over international crimes. Yeah? So that means domestic courts can deal with their own nationals and with other nationals if they subscribe to universal jurisdiction. Then we've got international courts and tribunals, of course, and we know more about that. Coming back to immunity then. So a distinction here is made between immunity in the Latin terminology, ratione personae, and ratione materiae. Okay, so this regards immunity, right? So this is the immunity of the person, and this is the immunity of regarding the issue. Why might there be a distinction there when it comes to immunities? This is the legal distinction which is made in international law.
So the heads of state.
Yeah. So I had. Yeah.
The question is personality is regarding the heads of state and their credibility rather than the actual matter itself. Which would be the
Yeah. So give me an example.
It was the arrest warrant case that was in the Belgian instance. He claimed immunity because it was at the state. But when he made the actual call to Judge Alvarado, he was actually outside the office. And so they said, because that's changed from national personality to the actual instance itself, he should be prosecuted.
Yeah. So he was foreign minister rather than the head of state, I think. He was a minister which complicated the whole this whole issue. Anyway, so the distinction here is that there are certain immunities which belong to the person because of their role. Yeah? So as long as they are in this role, they are immune. And so there's, of course, discussions as to how far down the line it goes. So if the Minister of Agriculture commits international crimes, would they still be immune? And so on, right? So if it's the head of state, yes, the head of state should have to be able to travel, but what about the Minister of Agriculture? Do they need to be able to travel around? Not sure. So there's sort of this distinction there, or this question about the immunity which attaches to the person. And usually this would then also mean that the immunity is only valid so long as they are in that role. Yeah? As soon as they are retired, replaced, whatever, then they become culpable for their actions. Which is then why it's often combined with this element, which says that a person in power has to be able to make decisions without thinking about whether they're going to be made criminally responsible. So they don't only have to travel around, but they also have to be able to make these decisions. So for the decisions that they make, the actual material decisions, they should be immune in regard to those. Yeah, do you see the difference between the two? But here, the reasoning is, and this is the less contentious one, the reasoning is that, of course, if someone, as part of their, uses their privilege in order to make decisions about the extermination of one ethnic minority, then surely that can't be protected under international law. Yeah? So there's a distinction that's made there, and one which, as Cal mentioned, which was discussed in the ICJ, so not in the ICC, in the arrest warrants case, which was a case between Belgium and the DRC, Belgium being the former colonial power in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, so that distinction in terms of immunities. Yes?
So, for the second one, in terms of acts which the criminals the whole community, they essentially either dealt with acts as heads of state, and those acts were, obviously there's the whole evidence there. But can they advance that argument as part of their defense?
Could they advance which argument?
Saying that they've got immunity because their acts were done as officials or heads of state in terms of
Yeah. Yeah. Well, under the, it's all not very clear. It's all kind of up in the air, decided on a case-by-case basis. But what the arrest warrants case said is that generally, so long as the person is in their role, the ratione personae would protect them, but not, so they would become culpable after. So when they're no longer in that role, and the materiae would not protect them in regard to international crimes.
Okay. Well,
Even if they are still.
But for domestic crime, so if sort of Trump came here and shot someone, would he be arrested?
If Trump
Came here and shot someone, or committed a crime,
committed a
which
crime
is not international,
which is not international,
yeah, so he won't be arrested or anything.
He wouldn't be, well,
There's diplomatic immunity there, isn't it? You just being escorted to the airport. You must do the
His
extent
car.
of the day.
well, he would probably not be, he might be prosecuted, but, so this is always the distinction, isn't it? For one murder, you're more likely to be prosecuted in your own state than you are for murder of thousands. This is why there is an idea of international criminal law, because often that's how it works. So if he murders one person, he's more likely actually to be prosecuted than if he drops a bomb on an ethnic minority somewhere, or saying he's battling Islamists, for example, right? Would Trump be made responsible under the ICC? No, because the US is not a state party to the Rome Statute. Now, this is also something that Deborah Kunde, and it's interesting, again, sort of be conscious of where these people are publishing. This is in the American Journal of International Law, and at that time, of course, the Americans had a particular interest in would their then President Bush be made responsible. Was it still 2004? Was it still Bush? Yes, it was, yeah. Would he be made responsible for any war crimes committed in Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever? And now we know from our more critical reading that a lot of the negotiations which happened in Rome were based on the Americans saying, we're not going to be member states of the Rome Statute, but we also don't want any kind of universal jurisdiction provisions in the statute. So we want to make sure that our nationals will not be prosecuted under any kind of circumstances under the International Criminal Court. When does that become a grey zone? When is it possible that the jurisdiction of the ICC could grip even those who are not member states to the ICC?
Security Council referral.
Security Council referral, exactly what the situation we've had in Sudan. Sudan, not a member state.
And that's never going to happen, is it? Because there's always going to be a veto. And if one of the member states, G5 is concerned, it's just going to say that.
Yeah. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with the US, because the US is one of the permanent 5 members on the Security Council, so they would veto it. But there is a provision within the Rome Statute which potentially could mean that American soldiers could be arrested for international crimes under the Rome Statute. And that is, if these American soldiers commit international crimes on the territory of a member state. Yeah? So then they could potentially be brought under the jurisdiction of the ICC. What do you think the US has done?
They've made some bilateral agreements with states and said, can you not touch your soldiers?
Can you not touch the
Well, can you not hand them over to anyone, essentially?
Yes. And it made lots of individual agreements. I can't remember the number, a huge number of bilateral agreements with states. Those in the Global South, it said, we will no longer provide any kind of development aid if you have anything to do with our soldiers being prosecuted at the ICC. What did it do to the Netherlands? Can't do any kind of agreement with the Netherlands, of course, but it then decided, the US then decided to enact legislation which says that if the Netherlands were to detain any American soldier, weapons, long-range missiles would be pointed towards the Netherlands, and they would attack the Netherlands, and it would be seen as an act of war. So that's how far the US is willing to go to ensure. Sorry?
There's also some American legislation that specifically provide for it, where even if someone was detained in Geneva, they said you could actually invade Geneva to rescue their citizens.
Oh yes, yeah, and and in public international law, there are cases of where it's done that, referring to this as a use of force. But in this case, there is a piece of legislation in the US. I forget what it's called. It's something called the Hague Act or something like that. And it says that its long-range missiles would point to The Hague if it ever got involved with any kind of military personnel. So, I mean, again, this is all argued in very kind of neutral, legalistic terminology of what the situation of US soldiers would be. But of course, we know that the background to all this legalistic expertise that's going on there were very hard negotiations in Rome where the Americans exerted a lot of power. Because of course, although the Americans are not member states of the Rome Statute, they have been very closely involved in drafting the Rome Statute and its provisions and exerting its power that way in order to make sure that they stay immune. So it's not like the US says, the ICC, we don't really care what's going on there. It's actually the reverse. When I was working at the University of Leiden, and there were constant, based in The Hague, there were constant delegations from the US, massive delegations, wined and dined and whatever in The Hague, for reassurances, saying, no, we still have the same stance, we're still not going to do anything, and so on. So we'll see what happens now because of course investigations have been opened in regard to Afghanistan, and we will see whether actual arrest warrants come out of that, and if they do, if there's arrest warrants against the US. Very unlikely, considering that this would most likely trigger war. So again, what I always say to my undergraduates, international law is practical and not principled, usually. Even international criminal law, where the whole basis is seemingly on principle, is still practical in many political regards. Okay, so there's that tension there. The tension within the Rome Statute. Now, if you go back and read it, there's a whole discussion about where that tension comes from. There are two articles which seemingly contradict one another in the Rome Statute, which Darko Kunde highlights. And it's actually these two articles, Article 27 of the Rome Statute and Article 98 of the Rome Statute, which 2 weeks ago, when South Africa was asked to go to the ICC and make declarations about its non-compliance, these were the two articles which were discussed in quite a lot of depth there. Okay, let's think then about today's theme of peace versus justice, because I think that leads on quite nicely from what we've been saying so far. What's the peace versus justice debate in international criminal law? And it is the central debate regarding the legitimacy of the whole field, really. What is peace versus justice?
Amnesty.
Sorry?
Amnesty, whether it's to stop the war, to give amnesty to certain individuals.
Yeah.
In short.
Yeah. Can I have a whole sentence again?
That's a whole sentence.
With the context.
Context is your question. Well, there's certain cases like Cohen was involved in the Resistance Army. In order to stop the fighting, they said, well, look, if you need to stop the fighting, we'll have a ceasefire, we'll stop the war, and we'll promise we won't prosecute the kidnappers, for instance. Other people say, well, look, if you do that, you let people get away with everything for
Yeah.
you can't let people do this with impunity. I mean, if you're looking at the Rashio personality incident, if you say you're going to prosecute someone, that gives them an excuse to dig in their heels and continue the war. So the argument is, should you have peace like you would want with the economy, or do you chase justice like you would Rouge trials?
Yes. And where is arguably the peace? So let's think about this. Where is arguably the peace rather than justice approach worked? Can you think of examples?
Or did it come back off anyway? Well, there was also
Well,
Bolivia
yes,
when we did transitional justice.
yeah, from transitional justice you should know this.
There was in Chile, was it, where the amnesties were a big part of lower order people. And one of the thing that I remember most about it was like they didn't let everyone off scot-free. They said, look, you know you're guilty, we're going to work to rebuild the infrastructure.
Yes. So there are actually quite a few examples in South America where that has been the sort of way of doing this. Chile's a good example. Arguably also Northern Ireland, right? While the whole tensions were going on with the IRA and so on, there was a whole thing of we don't negotiate with terrorists. This is always what was stopped any kind of peace agreement, because the government said we don't negotiate with terrorists, meaning we won't have, we want justice. We don't want any kind of peace agreement. And in the end, the negotiations with Sinn Féin did happen, and Sinn Féin was made part of the democratic system and had representatives, and have representatives. So arguably, Northern Ireland is an example where it has, it's always fragile, but I mean peace is always fragile, but that's an example where arguably it has happened, where there have been any big trials, and also that has led to concerns itself. But so there are examples where the peace route has arguably worked. Examples of where the justice route has worked. So, yeah.
Am I doing one here? That's done. You've done it on the transitional.
Yeah.
Just
Examples where trials
seemingly
seemingly led to, you mentioned the Khmer Rouge trial.
That's the obvious one, but the problem with that is
Rule justice is
Yeah.
former.
Yeah.
I forgot the country's name. The former.
Yugoslavia.
Yeah. This the justice rule.
Well, there was kind of like, not really much justice going on there. I just think most of them actually Jordan the case against them, or he let so many off. I mean, it was Karadzic, he was away for 20 years before he just got him going from there.
Yeah. Could be an example. Arguably, the Nuremberg trials as well helped to, in some way, stabilise things. Tokyo as well. So, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky to say when there is an element of victor's justice and these trials have been forced onto the losing side. Does that have anything to do with justice, but also was there any kind of opportunity for peace in the first place, right? But it's a real ongoing debate, particularly as regards the ICC and its intervention into states. So Cal, you mentioned Uganda, and Uganda is a really great example, because it's been studied in quite a lot of depth. So an arrest warrant was put out on Coney's head. First arrest warrant issued against Coney. And at that time, Coney and his rebels, they were still operating mainly out of the bush, or the jungle, whatever you want to call it. They committed many crimes without question. The government, of course, the Uganda government also committed many crimes. And there were calls for some kind of peace negotiations. Get Coney to come out of the bush, get Coney to come and sign some peace agreements, and the film Peace vs. Justice is actually about this, about the whole minister of the Ugandan government who had set everything up with Coney to negotiate and to make a peace deal. But then the arrest warrant from the ICC seemed to mess things up, because Coney then said, there is no reason for me to come out and sign or make any kind of agreement, because as soon as I come out of the bush, I will be sent to The Hague. So why should I sign anything? So then a small delegation of Ugandans went to The Hague and lobbied the then prosecutor to withdraw the arrest warrant in favour of peace. And they said, if you withdraw this arrest warrant, Coney has said he would make a peace deal, and isn't that more in favour of long-term stability and so on? We'll forget about, we're giving him an amnesty for the terrible crimes, but we want the country to be stable. The prosecutor then said, he's lying. Coney is lying. If you want to make any kind of peace deal, he will continue with the committing of these crimes. And of course, there is no guarantee that anyone who agrees on any kind of peace deal will actually stick to that. Sierra Leone, similar issue. Issa Sese, the person of the rebel group who actually got the rebels to lay down their arms, right? So this is the guarantee that there will be peace. If the rebels say, we'll get rid of all our arms. There was a big process, a big party of where all the rebels came out of the bush and laid down their arms and said, we're not going to fight anymore, we want peace. What happened? The Special Court for Sierra Leone then arrested Issa Sese, saying, well, you still committed those crimes. So he facilitated the peace, but he still got 150 years or something in prison. So there's that constant tension between peace and justice. Or another example is Sudan, again, where al-Bashir had said he would be willing to make some kind of peace deals with the rebels, the Janjaweed, and or there are different rebel groups, and the Janjaweed are one of those groups. And the ICC then issued an arrest warrant on regarding al-Bashir, and what he did was he expelled all of the agencies, development agencies and NGOs who were operating within Sudan. And of course, that has had knock-on effects in that Darfur and Sudan and so on have been very susceptible to poverty-related diseases and so on, and part of it is because none of the NGOs are actually allowed to enter the Sudan now, because Bashir has said, I've got this, it's the retaliation against the arrest warrant. So there, again, you could say, if there were no arrest warrant, there might not be justice, but there might be some form of peace. So, what do we think about the peace versus justice debate? Is there a solution? Is there a way of having both, or is it always an either or?
Either or.
Either or. Why do you think?
Because those examples you just given, where there is no guarantee that there will be peace, just because there's some sort of amnesty.
Yeah.
Because even those negotiations, they may not agree on certain things, and the war may as well continue. In terms of justice, it's the exact same thing, in the sense that a state may say, oh, we won't take it to court if you do this, and yet they still take them to court. So, then I guess that's a question for transitional justice.
Well, it's a question for international criminal law, because if we here are in agreement, another example of where, of course, the peace route was fairly successful, was South Africa, right? Amnesties on most of those who facilitated apartheid at that time. Well, it's relevant to international criminal law, because if we are in agreement here that the route to go is peace rather than justice, then we should all be transitional lawyers and say that international criminal law should be abolished.
I disagree.
Cap.
I disagree. Totally disagree. I don't totally disagree, but I accept that every conflict is unique unto itself.
Yes.
And so there's different solutions to each individual conflict. However, having studied the Soviets, and the Soviets got away with everything forever. No one's ever been prosecuted for the mass atrocities that the Soviets have done, let alone Castro and the others. Now, if you combine your cousin, I think most of us get the law of armed conflict. If we look at the premises of this, when it's lawful to kill someone, when there's a battlefield situation and the leader's there, you should take them out, go for them as fast and as quickly as possible to avoid all the paperwork. Because once the conflict is finished, then you have the problem of peace versus justice. Now, I don't condone it, but when Hillary Clinton, we saw he died with Gaddafi. Well, I think that's, it was bad, because it didn't actually address the conflict. It was just, let's just go for a head of state who, is not in tune with what our policies are. But someone like Stalin, for instance, if Patton continued, as he wanted to go after World War II, towards Moscow, and took out Stalin, or even Chiang Kai-shek took out Mao, it's hundreds of millions. But
Okay.
well, I'm generalising. I know from here, so you probably have a more specific opinion about it. But the certain heads of state, it was so bad that they need to go for him. Now, Stamper said, I don't think he was that bad because he kept controlling the situation. So the regime change is not something that should be aimed for. But, because that's when we talk about peace versus justice. We're looking at Assad. Do you want peace in the region, or do you want justice for those who was torturing? It's gone beyond that now, because there's so many dead in Syria that, the few hundred people that were tortured to death that started the conflict, it almost becomes irrelevant.
So, Syria, would we gain anything if Assad were made criminally responsible? Would the situation change?
It deteriorates. It's
It
like
would
Saddam.
deteriorate. See, this is the thing. It's not just, is there someone else to replace him? But it's the question also, would it possibly deteriorate as it did with, sorry?
In Libya.
In Libya? Or with Bashir? we're actually, because of the intervention through an international organisation, things have actually got a lot worse. So Gaddafi, as we know, definitely a dictator, no question about it. But certainly before any kind of intervention it was a stable, prosperous country. And the intervention was what brought the problems and has contributed to the refugee crisis now, of course, as well.
What's important to look at in our position now in history is how the West handles Erdogan.
Yes.
Because Erdogan is going to turn into the equivalent of a Hitler, and he's going to cause untold wars in the Middle East. Anyone who's studied history can see this coming a mile away. How does the West handle that? And this is the thing, I mean, we talk about how to handle the leaders after the conflict. How do we handle the leaders pre-conflict?
Yeah, so I think that's a distinction, yeah.
I think that's a good sort of question as well, because one of the problems with international law in general is that you kind of let things happen, let them come and create all this court and whatever after. Whilst these are things that could be resolved much before. It kind of goes back to the whole institutional problems that happen within international law in general. And I think that's a good point about that. I'm not sure about the whole.
Yeah. So the peace versus justice debate is not so black and white. We know that, and we know that those international criminal lawyers who claim that it's justice and then peace will happen down the line, that's naive to say that. And that often it's actually the reverse, that this version of justice happens and then the situation deteriorates even further. But it might be constructive to think about it in terms of different timelines. So if we have got civil unrest, ongoing civil unrest, then perhaps it's not the right time to then issue arrest warrants. If there's some form of stability, then perhaps it's a better time to look at individual criminal responsibility. However, of course, if we think about South Africa, amnesties for those who facilitated apartheid, terrible people, absolutely terrible people, and of course South Africa then went down the truth and reconciliation route, also often, as you know, from transitional justice, also partly a problematic process. But if you then later on prosecute, that could also, of course, cause sort of these underlying problems to erupt again. I mean, and as I said, South Africa, it is always, it is still fragile, the situation there. So, for international criminal law, what have we learned in terms of peace versus justice? We know, as I said, that this extreme version of justice at all costs, that is often not only problematic but also counterproductive. In order to think sort of in a possibly positive light about international criminal justice, and then have the presentations afterwards. The Malabo Protocol then. The Malabo Protocol as the African regional instrument for international crimes. So the African Union has for many years now said international criminal law, which sits in The Hague, is problematic because there is a evident anti-African bias. That doesn't mean that all those who are sitting in the ICC are racist. It means that there are structural problems which inevitably lead to some being cast as victims, some being cast as perpetrators, and others being cast as the saviours. The Malabo Protocol is similar to the Rome Statute. Some of it is really sort of rather clumsily copy-pasted from the Rome Statute. But there are provisions in there which are concerned with what we consider as African issues. Problems which can be addressed, which are problems which are typical of African states and which should be addressed within Africa. So some of the crimes include, for example, money laundering. They include corruption, and so on. So the Malabo Protocol really has an idea of regional international criminal justice. What do we think of that?
You said Malawi.
Malabo.
I was thinking that might be legal.
Malabo Protocol. What do we think of regional international criminal justice? Because there may be some more promise in it in that there would be more sensitivity to the requirements, to the peace requirements. There would be more knowledge about who needs to negotiate, who needs to be included.
That could become criticised. And also there's international standards that will be pretty much ignored. So if you have a coalition of, let's say, negative heads of state who all form their own union and say, all right, we're going to be consider ourselves the good guys, and everyone else who disagrees with us is bad, and therefore we'll have a wage war or to exclude them.
Yeah. What are you going to say?
It's a good sentiment, but in practice it's just unlikely to work.
Yeah, and of course the example of that is the politicization of the Malabo Protocol, is that the Malabo Protocol does include provisions for head of state immunity. So, yeah. What do we think of justice? What?
It's the Malawi's own accountable to citizens and international community.
What do we think about international criminal justice? What do you predict where we will be in 10 years' time with international criminal justice? Where will the International Criminal Court be? Will it have fallen off of its throne or whatever it is? Or will it continue to be this idea of the International Criminal Court as the beacon of
I
justice?
think they should be bolder. I think if they're not bold, it's going to break them down.
Bolder.
Yeah. Bold being said, I mean, issue arrest warrants. If they're not enforced, that's another issue. But they should be bold in issue arrest warrants, like the voice we heard. But rather than just like, yeah, well, we're just going to be a pragmatic. I don't know. I've got a great quote here from Alan Branch. I really choked trying to write this down because I was listening to the radio. Opportunistic pragmatism masquerading as responsible technocracy. So I know we never talked about hegemony, but that kind of fits with my opinion before so.
Yeah. But interestingly, Adam Branch is he's quite positive about the Malabo Protocol, and he knows the region very well. So he's got quite a idealistic view of its potential. So that's why possibly that is the route it will go. In terms of who asked me what I think about this, I always get asked this because I always bring out this. I think that what happens with these processes is that a positive thing is that it provides a platform for discussion, right? So I think of this in terms of incidental justice. I'm going to trademark that because until I actually publish something on it. I think it's a kind of accidental justice that happens sometimes through the ICC is not actually intending to do the right kind of justice, But because of its anti-African bias, in fact, there is now a big community of scholars who are interested in addressing that and who are saying this is a problem we need to talk about. And this is not just a problem of the ICC, this is a problem of other institutions as well. This is a problem that goes back to colonial times, so we need to address that. This is a problem which is visible at the WTO, so we need to address that. So it offers an accidental platform for political debate and also for alliances around that. And those who say, for example, a debate has been ongoing at SOAS, at the university there, decolonising the curriculum, saying we don't want to just read the ideas of dead white men. What about the ideas of people in Asia and in Africa and whatever? There is a wealth of knowledge which is untapped in terms of education and which is part of this debate and can make it richer. So I think it's a kind of accidental justice or incidental justice which happens through international criminal law. And if we take anything from it, I think we can take that from it. We've got this module, after all, as a way of talking about some of the problems. And if you guys go out and somehow put that into practice, whatever you're going to do in the future, then I'll be happy. If with a consciousness of these are problems that we've discussed in class. So that is ending on my on my positive note. So we've got 2 presentations, and then I'll just mention something about next week and the mooting exercise, the trial of rupture. So I haven't got any new material for you because, as I said, you'll be writing your coursework now, so you probably don't have new material. But I will separate you into Group A and Group B, and I'll email you about this tomorrow morning, where I would like Group A to individually, and I'll give you just at the beginning of the class next week, I'll give you some time to discuss together, to prosecute Trump on his intervention in Syria. Then Group B will be so that will be the prosecution, and then Group B will be the defence for Dominic Ongwen, who is at the ICC, with a mind to a politics of rupture. I'll email that to you, but I'd like you to think about what would you say in court, how would you say it, and how would you draw out all of these themes that we've been talking about in court. If you were a bold legal counsel, what would you do? A bold prosecutor prosecuting Trump, and the Russell Tribunal model may be helpful there, and then prosecuting Ongwen, defending Ongwen as a trial of rupture will be the other group. So I'll email you about that tomorrow morning so that you have some time to do some research in the next week. It's just sort of bringing together some of the themes that we've been talking about. So don't go off and do big presentations or anything like that. Okay, is that all right? Yes. Good. And then, so shall we begin with you? Do you need to? Yeah. Just how to begin? Yeah. It's just a little more. There you go. And so just.
Well, I'm gonna talk something about the Harvey Trail, the former Chilean dictator. So, who is Vincent Harvey? Harvey was president of the former French colony of Chile from 1982 until he was deposed in 1990 by the current president. Harvey has been living in the exile in Senegal ever since. And Harvey's government has responsibility for widespread political killings, systematic torture, and thousands of arbitrary arrests. The government periodically targets civilian populations, including the South and various ethnic groups, killing and arresting group members when the administration find that the group leaders pose a threat to Harvey's rules. And then a 1992 Chilean Justice Commission accused that Harvey's government of systematic torture and said that 40,000 people died during his rule. Most abuses were carried out by his political police. The documentation and the security directorate whose directors proposed directly to Harvey. So why it takes so long to bring him to justice? Even Chilean government has long expressed that they support for Harvey's prosecution, and in 1990 and in 2002, it waived Harvey's immunity from being from prosecution abroad. After that, it also agreed to help finance the court and cooperated with investigation judges. However, before 2012, there were many difficulties for establishing the court. Problems were like disputes about the Senegalese court lacked competence to try crimes committed abroad, and some negotiations between Senegal and the African Union about who paid for the money and something like that. So until July 2012, the International Court of Justice found that Senegal had failed to meet its obligations under the UN Convention against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment of public or punishment, and ordered Senegal to prosecute Harvey without further delay. If it did not prosecute him, so the new Senegalese government reacted quickly to the ICC decision, expressing its commitment to begin prosecution.